Here's something I think you guys will be interested in. I've been meaning to read the comments from the last video about Democrats. It did very well, so I want to hear what you guys have to say. I'm sure the comments are going to be very behaved and cordial. It looks like there's a lot of Republicans watching my stuff, which is totally fine. But I think you guys need a video just for you. I'm not here to judge or rain on your guys' parade, but for all the winning you've had recently, there's a weird feeling in the air, right? Like something's on the horizon, you just can't put a pin in it. That's it. You don't have a candidate. Well, JD Vance may argue otherwise, but you don't all seem super thrilled with him. If you saw my last video on the subject, you'll know I called it Who Broke the Democrats? There's a reason the title for this one is a little different. We know who broke or changed the Republicans. Come on, you can say it. I can't in the first minute of the video for monetization reasons, I think, but you can. That's close enough. All right, I think the future of the Republican Party is in some ways clearer than the Democrats. The problem for the Democrats is they seem directionless. It leaves a lot of different paths open that we can speculate on. But for the Republicans, whatever happens will be a direct result of what they're choosing to do today. I think this slims down the possibilities for the future candidates and the future message of the party considerably. So we're gonna do something a little different in this video. To get ready for 2028, instead of running through a complete history of the party, dissecting what drives them and rebuilding their approach from the ground up like we did last time, I've picked 3 examples of somewhat recent presidential elections that will give us what I think are the 3 possible paths for Republicans in 2028. There are similarities across all of them. You'll catch on pretty quickly. They all follow the tenure of a sitting Republican president, but the environments they operate in are drastically different from historical perspectives. It's easy for a party to get distracted when they're on top. After Obama's win in 2008, a consensus started to form that Republicans might never win another election again. Books like The Emerging Democratic Majority took the political world by storm, arguing that demographic shifts would make it impossible for Republicans to ever win again, as they were mainly appealing to older rural and suburban white voters, which were statistically shrinking in terms of the overall population. It hasn't even been 20 years, and it feels like the conversation has completely flipped, which is why we need to take a step back and look through history, because I think it might have more to say than the daily takes from Joe Rogan or Hassan Piker. Let's go figure it out. Let's start in 1976. I'm gonna assume if you're watching this that you know enough about Watergate that I don't have to run through the whole history lesson. Needless to say, by 1974, at the end of the whole scandal, Nixon resigns in disgrace, and in steps in Gerald Ford. It's important to know that he wasn't the vice president on the ticket when Nixon won in 1972. That was Spiro Agnew. He resigned a year before Nixon for an entirely unrelated scandal involving tax evasion. The 70s were awesome. Anyways, Ford was appointed as vice president, and soon after, president. You would think being entirely unelected, he would be incredibly unpopular, but you'd actually be incorrect. After taking the Oval Office, his approval hit 71%. Pretty impressive for a guy that nobody voted for. And then he pardons Nixon, like immediately. And the numbers crater. Within weeks, his approval drops to 50%. By 1975, it's in the 30s. People felt betrayed. It's not just that he left Nixon off the hook, it's that he didn't explain it well. The vibe quickly shifted from Ford being some nobody to someone who just had the job to take care of his buddy. By Election Day in 1976, a third of voters were still citing the pardon as a reason to vote against him. Even his own party didn't fully buy in. Ronald Reagan, yes, that Ronald Reagan, nearly beat him for the nomination that year, which is not normal. Presidents don't usually almost lose their own primary unless something's really off. The base didn't see Ford as the future, and he didn't do much to argue otherwise. So that's the Republicans. But in the other corner, we have Jimmy Carter, a governor from the South and very religious. Remind you of anyone? People don't really know who he is, but he's clean, he's young, and he keeps saying the line, "I will never lie to you." And after Nixon, that hits. On election day, turnout is low, enthusiasm is lower, and Carter squeaks out the win. And the lesson? If your president leaves office with scandals and a bad track record, your next guy, no matter how nice or decent presenting they are, is still the one standing next to the wreck. And in 1976, that was enough to lose. Now, I'm not saying this will happen in 2028, but Republicans should be prepared. For all I know, the economy will be thriving and there won't be any major foreign wars in 2028. I really hope that's the case. I can still feel the comments firing up beneath me, but hear me out. Even though you didn't win this one, we have 2 more examples to get through, and there is a path for you. Yeah, things really didn't go very well for Nixon and Ford back there, but now it's the 80s. It's the Republican golden age. Remember that guy that challenged Ford in the primary? Well, he got the nomination next time and won the presidency twice. We've basically beat the Soviet Union and the economy is doing significantly better. Unfortunately, Reagan can't run again on account of term limits and possible alleged health concerns, but we want to keep the good times rolling. Who's his vice president again? Right. George Herbert Walker Bush. He's very polite, buttoned up, feels like your friend's dad who insists on wearing boat shoes indoors. But here's the thing, it doesn't really matter, because he was Reagan's guy. That's all he needed to say. Bush runs on continuity, on being the heir to the Reagan era. He even steals some of Reagan's greatest hits. Tough ads, lots of American flags, some questionable moral panic, looking at you, Willie Horton. I have absolutely no idea who's going to remember that, but if you do, that's for you, Willie Horton fans. During this campaign, he throws in a little phrase that will haunt him forever.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
But let's not worry about that for now. We have an election to win. Flash forward to election day and it all works. He crushes Michael Dukakis, a guy so boring and middle of the road that he made Bush seem interesting. Bush ended up with 53% of the vote and 426 electoral votes. This is the most textbook example of someone we have riding a president's popularity straight into office. Reagan hands him the keys to the car while it's still full of gas. But before we move on, we need to point out the elephant in the room. Bush wasn't Reagan. Not even close. He doesn't have the charm, the catchphrases, the cowboy boots. What he does have is policy briefings and a deep understanding of foreign policy, which is great for running the country, but it's less great for inspiring crowds and winning future elections. People joke that he was Reagan without the pizzazz. And honestly, yeah, that tracks. Fast forward to 1992. The Gulf War is over and we won. Like, actually won. No shade to your son, Bush. His approval rating briefly hits 90%, but then comes a recession, and he breaks that famous tax pledge. Cue conservative rage. Pat Buchanan jumps into the primary just to air grievances, and it works. The base starts to fracture. Now toss in Ross Perot, the billionaire wildcard. He starts pulling votes from disaffected conservatives, deficit hawks, and disillusioned independents. And because of all this, Bill Clinton is able to make a name for himself playing saxophone on Arsenio and saying, "It's the economy, stupid." And that's how it ends. Clinton wins with just 43% of the vote. Bush drops to 37% and Perot nabs 19% and plays spoiler in key states. I think it's important to note that Republicans from that era, and most notably Bush's son today, argue that if Perot left the race, Bush would have easily won. Clinton was not all that great of a candidate. And they are partially right. That would happen if that happened, but Perot did stay in the race, and that was a result of the actions Bush took. So yes, Reagan's popularity got Bush to the door, but once people saw who was running things, they didn't care for them to stay for another 4 years. I think 1988 is the best case scenario for Republicans in 2028. If things go well and Democrats continue to run boring compromise candidates, JD Vance will coast to the presidency. Whether or not he stays there is a lot more up in the air. Maybe someone will run a AI clone of Ross Perot in 2032 or something. Who knows? All right, you know what time it is. It's the 2008 election. I genuinely don't know what it is about elections in the 2000s that excites me so much. I think it might have been because I was a kid and I didn't have any bills to pay and Club Penguin still existed. Anyways, where were we? Right. The Bush years are ending, and the country's mood is not great. There's a war still going on, a recession just kicking off, and a Republican president with approval ratings in the 20s, near historic lows. And in the middle of that firestorm is Dick Cheney, the sitting vice president. Now, here's the weird part. Unlike the last two guys, he doesn't even try to run, like at all. From the jump, he was saying things like, "I made it clear when I took the job that I had no aspirations to run for president myself, that I wanted to be part of the team." He really had no separate ambitions, no shadow campaign, just vibes, scary, war profiteering vibes. I need to stress how weird this is in American politics. Normally, the VP at least pretends to want the job, but Cheney bowed out so hard it left a power vacuum in the party. For the first time in 80 years, the White House had no stake in the race at all. And not because the party couldn't find one, but because the guy in the chair was radioactive. Like, cartoonishly unpopular. Even if Cheney had wanted to run, it would have been a joke. His disapproval ratings were above 60%. At one point, he was polling worse than Richard Nixon during Watergate, Iraq, torture, wiretapping, Katrina, the housing crash. People were exhausted, and even Republicans were jumping ship. I love this statistic. By 2007, 1 in 5 GOP voters wanted Bush's presidency to just be over already. The party was bleeding enthusiasm from all sides. So what happened? The GOP primaries turned into a wide open mess. John McCain, Mitt Romney, and Mike Huckabee became the frontrunners, all fighting over what the party should be next. Nobody wanted to carry the Bush banner. McCain even trashed Bush's Iraq policy, calling it a train wreck. Imagine running against your own president's war while trying to win his party's nomination. That's how broken things were. Without Cheney in the race, and really without anyone defending the Bush legacy, the Republican Party just sort of drifted into 2008 leaderless. No message, no direction. John McCain, the man who narrowly lost to Bush in the 2000 Republican primary, ended up the nominee, but he's stuck between trying to excite the base and win over moderates. He fails at both, and Barack Obama walks through the front door. 2008 is the cautionary tale. If these three timelines are the ghosts from A Christmas Carol, this is 100% the ghost of Christmas Future. And I mean one of the scary ones. I'm talking Jim Carrey's movie, or the Muppets one. You know what I'm talking about. When a presidency ends in disaster, the vice president doesn't just struggle. They can cease to exist as an option. Cheney wasn't just an unviable heir, he was a black hole where the party's future should have been. And that led others to seize the moment. So what I'm trying to figure out is, what is the 2028 version of John McCain? Someone who had a primary fight and lost to the guy who became super unpopular. I think in this timeline, Nikki Haley would fit right into that slot. But what do I know? Now that the history lesson's done, let's break down exactly what we've learned. Number 1. The heir apparent is usually the frontrunner. There's an unspoken rule in Washington that the vice president automatically becomes the party's frontrunner the next time around. In fact, that's why 2008 was so unprecedented. It was the first election in 8 decades where the White House essentially waited on the sidelines. No president or vice president running. So assuming there's no crazy turn of events, we should expect JD Vance to run in 2028. And that, again, absent anything going crazy, I would like this video not to age like milk, he will get the party's nomination. Lesson number 2, the charisma gap is real and powerful. The successors to the current president seem to never really hold the same charisma. Political science literature refers to the routinization of charisma. Once a charismatic leader departs, their movement often struggles to transition into a routine party structure. The GOP saw this after Reagan, leading to a wonkier Bush, and then a more ideologically divided party by 1992, and can arguably expect the same after Trump, who, like him or not, has a singular personality that's defined GOP politics. As one commentator put it, quote, "His voters just don't turn out when they can't vote for him." That indicates how much the party's energy is tied to the individual charisma of its leader. Without that spark, whoever the successor is runs the risk of appearing dull or establishment by comparison. And the final lesson, a math equation. Term end approval plus economy equals succession fate. It doesn't get more consistent than that. If the outgoing president is popular and the economy's fine, their party usually keeps the White House. If they're hated and everything's on fire, forget it. Reagan had 60+% approval. Bush Sr. cruised to the presidency. Clinton left office with 66%, a budget surplus, and Al Gore basically tied that election. The trend's brutal. No party has held the presidency with a departing president below 45% approval. As of filming this, Trump is exactly at 45%. It doesn't matter if the candidate is flashy or fresh. If the country's miserable with the current guy, voters want change. How Trump decides to end things will be the variable that decides everything. Full stop. And if he does land the plane and leave things in a better place than he found them, who's most likely to get the spot next? We should figure that out with some kind of list. We're so back. I'm just going to hope that this goes better than the last time. I think last time I did this with the Democrats, I said it wasn't a good idea. And this time I would say it is an even worse idea. But let's get going. Whatever template I'm using this time has a lot more candidates than the last time. So we're gonna go through these a little quicker. First up on the scene, we got Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp is the governor of Georgia. I believe he had a bit of a close race with Stacey Abrams the first time the two fought, and then he has progressively become more popular. He kind of positions himself as pretty culturally conservative, but still willing to stand up and oppose Donald Trump on certain things. But his name recognition is so-so, and his broad appeal, so-so. But he's really not a bad candidate. I'm gonna put him B tier for right now, for Brian, obviously. Chris Christie, I feel like people like me like Chris Christie, which is exactly why he will not be the Republican nominee. Okay, Chris Sununu. Similar to the last one, I feel like people like me like Chris Sununu. Chris Sununu was the governor of New Hampshire, is not anymore, but was considered one of the most popular governors in the country and governed as a Republican in a state that is not very known for being super Republican. That gives him props, and he has certain things he'll go to bat for, and he's been selective with how he's decided to put himself in the public spotlight. Okay, Donald Trump, I don't want to engage in the conversation about a third term. Are there ways they could try to do it? Sure. Maybe, but I'm not going there. I don't think it's a productive conversation to have because it's such an unlikely possibility to get to work, and even much less of a likely possibility that people are going to vote for a third term. Other people may disagree, but I just don't even want to go there. I think it's one of those things that people think could be possible because everyone talks about it and there's nothing else behind it. Donald Trump Jr., okay, this goes back to kind of the consensus of this video, right? It depends how much people like Donald Trump, right? I don't think he's as far away from JD Vance in the successor camp as maybe some people want to believe. He's not a very likable person, but there's obviously name ID. He's young. If not 2028, he might start jockeying and positioning himself in the next decade to maybe run sometime down the line. I don't think it's soon. Unfortunately, I think he's got a better chance than our folks in C and D tier. Listen, Doug Burgum is one of those guys that works really well on paper. I feel like the Democrats have several of these guys, right? Would I consider him on the same lines as like a Gavin Newsom? Absolutely yes. He's a very conservative governor, I believe, from one of the Dakotas? Yeah, he was governor of North Dakota until 2024. He was in conversation for a possible pick for vice president, I think. Arguably, he would have been a better pick for vice president. He's not in the same vein as Brian Kemp because he tends to agree with Trump on a lot more. But he has, again, the kind of polished look that I think a lot of Republicans want out of the next candidate. Whether or not it's successful, whether or not he'll even run, unclear. At least Stefanik is someone where like, just a general note before we move on. I've been saying this, I might be proven wrong, but given the landscape of potential candidates in the next couple of elections, at least how we understand them right now, I think there's a better chance that the first female president will be a Republican than a Democrat. I want to hear what you guys think about that, if you agree. Glenn Youngkin, listen. People love Glenn Youngkin because he's like right-wing, but governing in a blue state. And he wins on issues that bring back suburban voters, which a lot of Republican strategists care about. And it makes him electable. I was about to put him in A tier, but the fact of the matter is he's going to be out of office, I believe, by the end of this year. I think he's going to fall out of favor in the national conversation, and people aren't going to remember him by the time we get to the 2028 primaries. I think it knocks him down a spot, but I think these three are like the horsemen of the moderate Republican appearing caucus. Greg Abbott, bro's going in A tier. I kind of got to speed through the rest of these. So, governor of a popular state, he's gotten a lot done. Democrats don't like him, but it's a Republican primary, and I think he has a shot. Josh Hawley, A tier. Man, he can play both ways. He can play for the MAGA base, and he can also play against. He's been doing a decent job of that in the Senate with the positions he's taking on things like Medicare and appealing to the new sort of base of GOP voters. I think he's got a good understanding of it. I think he's a good speaker. Katie Britt lost a lot of sauce after the GOP response to Joe Biden's State of the Union earlier, and she hasn't really made a name for herself outside of that. So Kristi Noem, same kind of deal. I think she had a bit more cred before becoming the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Liz Cheney, ain't no way. Rubio is scary. I'm going to put Rubio in S tier. Rubio has navigated the administration so far in a great way. There could always be a fallout if there is. He's getting knocked down immediately, but he's done a great job at bobbing and weaving his way through. In 2016, he was one of the most viable candidates. He's somehow managed to stay relevant and kind of bob and weave his way through. I think he's very, very capable of taking that job. Marjorie Taylor Greene, what are we doing? Same with Matt Gaetz, Mike Lee, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo. Yeah, no, what are we doing, guys? Nikki Haley, listen, I'm putting Nikki Haley in the S tier because there's a chance. If things go a certain way, I think she has a very clear road. She's carved herself out as a stronger Republican candidate who is against what this current administration is standing for. But if things go differently, she's absolutely no shot. Ron DeSantis is, again, he's strong on paper, but I'm putting him with Brian Kemp, Doug Burgum, Glenn Youngkin, like all these guys. Again, he's going to be out of office here very soon. I believe his wife is running to be Florida's governor, but I don't think he's going to have the sauce. I think he showed that he's kind of a weak candidate on a national stage against fellow Republicans, and I don't know what he would do differently. Same with Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz keeps having his elections get very close in Texas when they shouldn't. It's because he's inherently unlikable. All right, Tucker Carlson, all things considered, I don't know if he would run. Maybe he would. I think if he did, and this is kind of like if you saw the Democrat video, you know I kind of have a slant to outsiders. I think he'd do decently well. This is a very controversial figure, but he's someone who, since he's left the Fox News network, has started to garner this reputation as sort of someone who's not tied to the system anymore, and he's, a free thinker on the right and everything like that, and he's well-spoken, he can hold a crowd, he'd do well in debates. I think he could be really dangerous. Tim Scott has just been routinely disappointing. D tier or C tier, I don't know. I'm gonna put him in C tier, but I just think he had a lot of potential and a lot of promise, and he's really just bended to the whim of whoever holds any sort of influence or power over him at any moment. I can't think of anything that he's done to stand out of the crowd. This is a very crowded group of people, the more I'm looking at it. Tom Cotton's not bad, but I haven't heard from him in a while. Again, with the other picks that we have, I think it automatically places him pretty low on this list. I think Vivek is running for governor of Ohio, but if he doesn't, he's good with this administration. I think he'd get some spot. Honestly, I think one way or another, this guy's going to come up in the national conversation quite a bit before the primaries. He's well-spoken. I think he could very much surprise people, actually. And then we got the big guy. JD's going in S tier by default. But if this chart shows you anything, honestly, me doing this right now, it's got me thinking this now. And I really wasn't thinking this before making it, that the Republican field is significantly stronger, I think, at this moment than the Democratic field, at least with the people who are viable for the position. There's a lot of directions the party can go in. And the idea of a JD Vance, Marco Rubio, Nikki Haley direction, I honestly think Rubio and Nikki Haley have a better chance, but it could be JD Vance as well. I think most of the people in the S and A tiers here are more viable for the presidency in 2028 than some of the S and A tiers on the Democratic side. That should make you nervous if you're a Democrat, and it should make you cautiously optimistic if you're a Republican, and just maybe it has you thinking of other options. Anyways, that was fun, and I'm sure not at all controversial. I feel like I need to take a bath after doing that, but let's finish the video. That was actually really fun, I assume. I do the tier lists at the end of the recording of these videos, but I'm sure I put everyone in an order that is not at all controversial and definitely will not boost engagement in the comments. So what's next? Right. The Republicans have a 2028 problem. What we've learned so far in this video, from Gerald Ford to George H.W. Bush to the Cheney vacuum, it all points to one clear truth. What comes after a dominant presidency is rarely clean. If Trump leaves office with the economy up, his approval above 45%, and some kind of legislative win to point to, then yeah, someone like JD Vance might stroll right into the White House. But if Trump exits like Bush in 2008, with, say, chaos at the border, abortion bans sparking record turnouts, or swing voters blaming the deficit on tax cuts, then that problem becomes a catastrophe. The issue at the base of all of this that no one seems to be talking about is that no one knows what the party looks like without Trump on the ticket. Is it a Make America Great Again machine that can function without its operator? Or is it fully personality driven, with no second act? Because if the GOP doesn't solve that, it doesn't really matter who wins the primary. They'll be walking into the general election with the same baggage, just in a different outfit. I don't know if that analogy makes as much sense as I thought. But that's why this administration loves all the talk of a third term. Mark my words, it will not happen. There are no plans to make it happen, and it can't happen. But keeping it out there as a possibility allows the party to delay that really difficult conversation. For now, the GOP has to show it can pass the torch in 2028, keep the base, and rebuild its credibility with swing voters that it's lost in the past decade. And this isn't impossible, but it hasn't happened yet. And that's the real takeaway here. The Republican Party isn't out of time, but the clock's ticking. They have a 2028 problem. Whether they solve it or break under it is left to the guy in the chair right now. And if they do solve it, what kind of party is left standing on the other side?